Thank you and welcome to UrbanFig.com. Congratulations on your Growing Green Award.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah. I was wondering, when did you first become inspired to watch out for the monarch butterflies?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, I began my journey as a biologist when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I've been on that journey ever since.
And when did you start noticing the numbers of the monarchs decrease?
Well, it's interesting. You know, you follow a lot of different trends if you're an ecologist, which I am, and so I kind of keep my ear to the ground and watch and wait and see what's happening. And somebody turned up an interview that I did in 1999, and I said then that I was very concerned that the adoption of herbicide-tolerant crops, Roundup-ready corn and soybeans, was going to have a negative impact on monarch butterflies because it was going to eliminate the small number of milkweeds that were in those row crops. And it was a great place for monarchs to breed. And then in 2000, a study was done which showed that this was a really good habitat for monarch butterflies. There were more monarch butterflies produced in corn and soybean fields than almost anywhere else per acre. And that raised some eyebrows, because if you knew that if milkweed was going to disappear from corn and soybean fields, which are really dominant in the upper Midwest where the monarchs are breeding, that it was going to have an impact. And in 2004, I got a letter from a farmer who said that he was using this technology and it was going to eliminate monarch butterflies, and that spurred me to action, and we started a program then called the Monarch Way Station Program, which was an attempt to get people all over the country to create habitats for monarch butterflies and pollinators by growing milkweeds, which monarch caterpillars need to develop on, and growing nectar plants in their gardens. Since we started that program in 2005, we've lost a lot of habitat, and in particular, we've lost a tremendous amount of habitat due to the biofuel initiative that started at the end of 2007. We've lost approximately 24 million acres of habitat, pollinator habitat, monarch habitat, since the end of 2007. So that's a tremendous amount of conversion to cropland in a relatively short time. That's an area the size of the state of Indiana. So we really need to do something about this problem. It used to be that corn and soybean fields contained milkweeds, but with the adoption of Roundup-ready corn and soybeans, starting in 1996, but really taking off after the year 2000, then that habitat, that corn milkweed habitat, began to disappear, and as a consequence, the monarchs began to decline. And then we had the ethanol mandate that came along, and that took out even more habitat, and so the decline became even more severe. And so this past winter, we saw the lowest number of monarchs at the overwintering sites that has ever been recorded. I mean, it's a really abysmally low. It's less than 1 hectare of butterflies, and a hectare is about 2.2 acres of butterflies. Now, what that means is the total number at its peak, this butterfly had something like 18 to 20 hectares of habitat down in Mexico. And this is no trivial matter, because when you get down there and get into these forests with these colonies of butterflies, there can be 25 million butterflies per acre, which is really a pretty astounding phenomenon. So last winter we had 35 million butterflies overwinter down there, which is nothing, because in 1996 we had nearly a billion butterflies overwinter in Mexico. So the decline has been severe. It's been swift. It's got multiple causes, and the question now is, what are we going to do about it? And when I looked at all of the data and I looked at what's happening around this country, we've got a number of things that we're not dealing with very effectively, and one of those is that we're not dealing with the loss of habitat on an annual basis. So annually, due to development, due to conversion of landscapes to crops, due to a decline in wildlife habitats. So the bottom line is that we're losing about 1 million and 1.5 million acres a year. So the loss of habitat on a yearly basis means that if we don't address this, the population of monarchs and pollinators and ground nesting birds and all these other things are going to continue to decline.
What plants do monarchs pollinate?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because monarchs are not particularly good pollinators, but they are surrogates for all the other pollinators that they share their habitats with. So monarchs visit on the order of several hundred species of plants between the northern part of the breeding area of North America and where they go to overwinter in Mexico. So they're really long distance but infrequent pollinators. The significance of their role here is that they are surrogates for all the other species that they share the same habitat with. And this is not trivial, because if we're losing pollinators, we're losing the keystone group of organisms that keep all the habitats together.
So when you say surrogate, what exactly does that mean?
It's the representative of all the pollinators. Now, people don't know the bees. They don't know the pollinators. They don't know that there are 200 species of bees in Kansas, for example.
I see.
But there are 200 species that are really essential in the pollination of the native vegetation. People are just not familiar with these things. And many of these bees are small, but they're necessary. Many of them have unique relationships with particular plants. In some cases, we have obligate relationships between one pollinator and one plant. So if that pollinator doesn't exist, that plant doesn't produce seeds, and that plant eventually fades out of the system. That plant probably produces something that something else lives on. So we've got to keep the pollinators in the system, and this is why monarchs are telling us that we're not doing that very well.
In a way, they're the symbol of all the rest of the pollinators. So as we see them decrease, that means all the other pollinators are decreasing as well, even though they're maybe not as visible as the monarch is.
That's absolutely correct. I think this is really the importance of monarchs. They're telling us that we're not being very good stewards of the habitats out there, and we need to be good stewards because it's in our best interest to do so. Those pollinators, pollinate about 70% of the vegetation out there, and without them, without those services, we don't have the fruits, nuts, berries, seeds, foliage, stems, roots that everything else feeds on.
What can individuals do to help support this movement? Should they plant milkweed in their backyard? I mean, what should they do?
Well, that's what we're encouraging people to do. People can go to our website and they can go to the milkweed market, and if we don't have the milkweeds they need, they can go to their nearest native plant location, a native plant vendor, and see if the native plant people have milkweeds for them. But we're also encouraging people to plant a lot of nectar plants because the adult butterflies need nectar. And we're trying to get the gardeners all over the country to do this. Earlier I mentioned that we have something like 8,000 registered monarch way station sites, but we really need about 7 or 8 million. We need the gardeners all over the country to start planting for pollinators. The unfortunate thing is that we plant for visual things. We plant for flowers that are pretty and repetitive and multifloral and so on and so forth. But most of those that we can get at the big box stores have no nectar or pollen in them. They've been bred such that they no longer provide for pollinators. And there are lots of beautiful plants that we can put in gardens, a lot of native plants that we can put in gardens that are perfectly good for pollinators and quite beautiful in their own right. So we're just part of a movement to kind of change the culture here a little bit and encourage people to plant things that are not only native but are good looking and will provide the resources that the pollinators need.
Well, would you say are the top 5 plants that people can grow at home that would help pollination?
The bee plants are the legumes and the mints. For a lot of the butterflies, you plant the composites, a few of the mints. And for some of the butterflies, you plant things like lantana and pentas and the sterile buddleias or butterfly bushes. Those are the things that you plant for the different types of pollinators.
And what about, for going back to the monarchs, for the milkweed, any growing tips on that? I think they're pretty easy to grow, but I actually have never grown it myself, so that's the first thing I need to do this summer is plant some. But do you have any growing tips that you can give our listeners?
Well, people can go on our website and get information from us, and if they get plants from us or through our nursery that we work with, we'll give them some general tips on how to do this. But it's pretty easy to handle the plugs. The plugs are easy because you simply plant the plug. These are really good, healthy plants when they're received, and you water them and mulch around them and water them once a week, and they should do just fine.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, and I thank you for taking on such an important mission.
All right, Carol, just get the word out there. We need everybody on board here. This is, everybody has to man the ship here. We all have to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely.